It's over a year since Russia invaded Ukraine, and it's hard to pick out what's really important for understanding this conflict. There's so much information that if you're truly interested, it's hard to navigate your way through it. But that's what I'm for. I'm Dr. K, a political scientist that looks at how information is shared. And I used to live and work in Kyiv. We're going to take the next 7 minutes to cover what information you should watch for when you're looking at war reporting on your social media feed, especially about Ukraine's spring counteroffensive. The war in Ukraine is happening on social media. People aren't just sharing news reports. News reports are being written about what people and soldiers are sharing. Because of algorithms and confirmation bias, you might not be getting an objective picture. To do that, I suggest first looking at the numbers and then looking at politics. Counting resources is a reliable way to understand what's happening on the battlefield. The number of soldiers on each side, the equipment, and the supply lines are important. If the numbers don't add up, that's where politics usually comes in. Many thought Russia would not have any problems taking over Ukraine when the invasion started in February 2022. There were even reports that after Russia was pushed back from Kyiv's northern suburbs, uniforms for the Russian victory parade were found left behind. Internal politics in Russia, a corrupt system, meant that the Kremlin learned it could not trust the numbers it was being supplied with about maintenance of military vehicles or the ability to supply things like food or diesel for its convoys. American officials and the leaked Pentagon documents, according to the New York Times, say Ukraine is preparing to launch a counteroffensive against Russia as early as next month. So let's look at the numbers we can find on this. The last big counteroffensive was the September Kharkiv counteroffensive. During that, Ukraine retook over 500 settlements and 12,000 square kilometers of territory in northeastern Ukraine. And many are looking at the September push as the basis for understanding what could happen now in May. The spring offensive is expected to happen in the south, along Ukraine's coastline on the Azov Sea and close to where Russia took over Crimea in 2014. During the past 6 months, the Ukrainian army has transitioned exceptionally well. Back in September, Ukrainian soldiers managed to win huge swaths of land back in a really short time. With just tactics and low-risk aversion, Ukraine was able to win back 50% of the land occupied by Russia in the initial invasion. Since November, Russia has only gained about 40 football fields of territory. And it's also estimated that since then, 80,000 Russian soldiers have died for that small gain. Russia has also lost about 1,000 tanks, and Ukraine has captured 200 tanks, which is ironic because that makes Russia one of the biggest contributors of arms to the Ukrainian military. What else are the numbers showing us? Things are improving. American and NATO allies have supplied Ukraine with more artillery and ammunition for the upcoming battle, and officials say they hope supplies will last. Just 2 months ago, weapons were only trickling in, and U.S. officials were worried they might run out. According to the leaked Pentagon documents, 12 Ukrainian combat brigades of around 4,000 soldiers each should be ready by the end of April. On the other side of the battle lines, the Russians have poorly trained soldiers with worse equipment and a very high rate of attrition. It looks like Ukraine is better off than during the Kharkiv offensive, if the numbers are right. As part of their long aspirations to join NATO, Ukraine has followed the advice, if you want to join a club, then act like you're already a member. That means Ukraine's armed forces have been training to NATO standards and are actually able to do multi-stage offensives. That means you have different groups of weaponry working together, something observers say Russia has never been able to do. But if I'm talking about this, it's all common knowledge. Most of these numbers came out of a New York Times article citing the Pentagon leaks or a quick internet search. And while numbers are a good way to understand war, they're often protected. Ukraine has broken its usual rule of keeping military plans secret by talking openly about the upcoming battle. On TikTok, there's an uptick of videos of large groups of Ukrainian soldiers seemingly at the ready. Making this information available is happening because Ukrainian leaders most likely need to boost morale and pressure the West for weapons. Observers think that Ukraine's army will use deception and some fakes to throw the Russians off balance. Most people do think the offensive will push south towards Crimea, which was illegally taken by Russia in 2014, while Ukraine was in the middle of a revolution, with citizens pushing out corrupt politicians who were under the Kremlin's control. Russia wanted Crimea back once it realized that Ukraine was orienting itself towards Europe and getting difficult to control. Crimea is where the Soviet Union had its warm water ports, and the peninsula has military importance. Will Ukraine try to take back Crimea as part of the spring offensive? This is where understanding the conflict shifts from numbers to politics. While Ukrainians have dreamed of bringing back Crimea since 2014 when Crimea was annexed, the international community didn't actually do very much to stop Russia. Ukrainian officials have said their goal with the offensive is to break through Russia's dug-in defenses and cause a wide-scale collapse in the Russian army. The Ukrainians have said they won't agree to any peace talks until they push back the Russians and gain more territory. Without a decisive victory soon, Western support for Ukraine could weaken, and Kyiv could come under pressure to enter serious negotiations to either end or freeze the conflict. Russia will do all it can to keep Crimea, and negotiations usually only take place when one side is forced to negotiate. If you have the upper hand, you don't need to make deals. Some European countries, including France, are pushing for negotiations. For now, Russia's Vladimir Putin and Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky are both not interested in negotiating. Russia's capacity and willingness to absorb loss of life remains large, allowing it to mobilize more conscripts. And Ukraine has learned what negotiations bring. Even if both countries did have an agreement on paper, how would the agreement be enforced? It would depend on outside security guarantees that aren't being discussed. Remember, Ukraine was promised protection in 1994 in the Budapest Memorandum when it gave up its nuclear weapons. Its territory was invaded in 2014 and 2022. And what to watch for? In the next weeks, watch for the numbers. Think about who is supplying them, and after the spring offensive, watch for the politics. Do you feel better informed? Make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel.